Good morning, everyone. We live in an unstoppable rhythm nowadays. Technology cycles are shorter and shorter, and each couple of years, a disruptive innovation emerges. We're always looking for the next one, and the next one, and the next one. As humans, we're thirsty for this. Along this evolution, we have not paid attention to the impact of such evolution in our planet. But this year, 2020, we all had time to think about this. So for this conference, we challenge Emanuel Gonçalves from Oceano Azul Foundation to share with us his reflection on the recovery of the natural ecosystems, how this year's event impacts those ecosystems, the path we're taking, and how we can improve our impact if we try. Emanuel Gonçalves is a member of the Oceano Azul Foundation Board of Directors, and he is chief scientist. He has been involved in the creation, monitoring, and implementation of the marine protected areas in several regions, including discussions on the high seas. He's an associated professor at ISPA, Instituto Universitário, and is vice director of MARE, Marine and Environmental Science Center. Deputy head of the Portuguese Task Group for Marine Affairs that builds the National Ocean Strategy. He is also the coordinator of the EU group that led the negotiations, which approved the CBD scientific criteria for identifying ecologically or biologically significant areas in the marine realm. Member of the National Council of Environment and Sustainable Development. So please welcome Emanuel Gonçalves. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zita, for the kind introduction, and thank you very much also for the invitation to be here with you and exchanging a few points of view with this topical issue that I would like to address. I thought that I would start by showing you a video that the Oceano Azul Foundation recently made that I believe it speaks for itself. And so I invite you to sing that.
Can you hear it? Silence took over the towns, the cities, the whole world. We were forced to pause from what we thought were our priorities. But it was in this silence that we discovered that the world is capable of acting together with a common purpose, that nature can come back. What once seemed impossible, coming together to stop our self-destruction, to stop destroying nature, the ocean, the very planet that sustains us, is now something we know we can do. We know we must do. Can you hear it? Our voices speaking out together, our solidarity, joining together, rising loud out of the silence where we learned. What, you might ask? That we must act together for nature. It's now or never. Join the hundreds of organizations that have already signed on to rise up for the ocean.
So we are facing unprecedented challenges, of which the current pandemics is just the latest battlefield. And we're seeing changes with these challenges, and namely with the pandemics, and those changes are showing us images like this. As humans retreat to their homes in confinement, nature apparently is coming back. So we see the animals on our streets, we see animals in the oceans in places that are really busy and they were not seen because of that. But the question is really nature coming back? Or is this just an epiphenomenon of the fact that we are confined and the animals are just filling these spaces? We have learned a couple of lessons with the current pandemics which are important for this topic. We know that destroying nature has consequences, and the pandemics is the most visible one. We know that science more than ever is relevant for society, and we need it to tackle these challenges and to support policies. We know that we are investing in science now more than ever, specifically for this challenge. And we have this notion that probably nature is coming back because of that. But is it? That's a question that we need to address. We have this big effort trying to analyze the current situation and to quantify the impact of the pandemics on wildlife. And the truth is that we don't have yet the data to show us what those impacts are. I'm pretty sure that in the next month, in the next years, lots of scientific papers will be published to show us the impact of the pandemics on the wildlife, but we don't have yet a definite question to this answer. Definite answer to this question. But there are things that we do know. We know that we are facing a climate emergency, and we know that we are facing a species extinction crisis. There are no scientific doubts about this. So the scientific consensus built around these two challenges are overwhelming. The IPCC report tells us all that we need to know about this. The IPBIS report tells us all that we don't want to know about this. So if you are to take one message from this talk, please take this one. We know. We have enough information to act. We know that we are destroying the planet. And I would like to drive you through a journey from the ocean's point of view. So what do we know? And by the way, this is the motto of the Oceano Azul Foundation, because we think that this is the critical way that we need to look at the problems. And so how and what can be and what is the science-based evidence that we have to support those challenges? Well, on the climate emergency, it's clear that we know the CO2 that is building up in the atmosphere because of our economic model of development is increasing the temperature of the ocean. The ocean is becoming warmer, is becoming with less oxygen and more acidic. And this has a cascading effect from habitat destruction to sea level rise to toxic algae, bleaching of corals, acidification of the ocean, and impacts on fisheries. And to give an idea of what we're talking about, just in 2017, the amount of heat that the ocean took from the excess heat that is produced by the CO2 that we are putting in the atmosphere was the equivalent of 388 times the total energy production of China. And as you can see, just a small amount of that stays in the atmosphere. Here, the red that you see here, the land, atmosphere, and ice together, the rest is being stored in the ocean. And of course, if this is so, then this has consequences. The ocean is warming up. This large ecosystem that we have, which is 90% of the volume of the planet, is of course taking up all this heat. And is not only increasing the ocean temperature at the global level, but this heat is also accelerating. So it's not just the fact that it's heating, it's the fact that we are having more and more heat. And we know that records are being broken every day. Just two examples here. In February, we had a record temperature in Antarctica with 18 degrees temperature. And in June, we had a record breaking in Siberia with 38 degrees temperature. But this is on the news now every month and every day. We are breaking the records one after the other. September was the warmest September ever recorded. We had that in January this year. We had that in June. So we are having a clear signal that the planet is being affected by our activities. And the trends are all clear. So the increase in carbon dioxide through time show us a complete match in correlation with increase in sea surface temperature, sea level rise, decrease in pH, and decrease in ice cover. And if we go back and hintcast these values and go back to the information we have, we see that there is a clear cause for this heating, and that cause is the human's activities after the Industrial Revolution. And so scientists have put out a number of warnings to the world, and I would like to read you this first sentence on this paper. Scientists have a moral obligation to clearly warn humanity of any catastrophic event and to tell it like it is. And I'll come back to this topic a bit later. So what happens when there is more CO2 in the atmosphere? The CO2 reacts with the water. Reacting with the water, it creates carbonic acid. That releases hydrogen ions, and this is why the ocean is being more acidic today. And the fact that it's being more acidic has deep consequences for marine animals, because marine animals have lived in a very stable environment for millions of years and have adapted to that environment. And these animals many species depend on the calcium carbonate to build their skeletons. And so when we are changing the aragonite saturation and we are changing the acidification in the ocean, we are not allowing these animals to build their skeletons properly. And some of these are not animals, they are even plants, they are the basis of the food webs. Phytoplankton also depends on these. And so we are affecting the very basis of the functioning of the ocean ecosystems. We have done some research also on fish, and we show that in fish, is not just in phytoplankton, fish become sometimes confused and affected, and some of the functions are impaired by this ocean acidification. So they have difficulties in finding habitat to settle, they have difficulties in distinguishing predators from non-predators, they have difficulty in reacting fast to the events, and to recognize sounds. And of course, if this happens, then we have consequences for the ecology of the marine ecosystems, and we have consequences for the fish as such. And sound is a very important channel for fish. When fish breed, most species breed, they just put eggs on the plankton, these eggs go with the current, they feed outside of the reefs, but then they have to come back. And how do they find the reefs? They find the reefs by, sorry. Can you hear this sound? Looks like you're frying potatoes. This is biological sound from the reefs. This can be heard miles and miles away. And this is how the larvae will find their way home. The fact that acidification is impairing on this behavior means then the larvae will be lost in the ocean. And this, of course, has huge consequences as well. We have also shown in some of our research that the warming of the ocean is also impairing and is also changing the climate system, of course, because the ocean is the big climate regulator. And we have an equivalent of the El Nino here in Atlantic, which is the North Atlantic Oscillation. And we know that when we have negative signal in this oscillation, we will have warm and wet winters here in the Iberian Peninsula, for instance. And when we have a positive NAO, North Atlantic Oscillation signal, we'll have cool and dry winters. And this means that the winds will come from opposite directions, from the south in the first case and from the north in the second case. And what we are having is more and more negative events of this NAO, and this is the consequence of this is that species are coming from the south to the north. So species are moving with this warming, essentially. We are having a tropicalization of these systems attached to this negative NAO, and this tropicalization is becoming more and more frequent. So if we hindcast the predictions of this signal, we see that it's essentially in the last 2 decades that we have this change. So we are having big changes in the ocean caused by these human impacts, and actually we are having some extreme cases, such as this surgeonfish that was detected here in our waters, and it's a total tropical species. So it's a dory from the cartoon, and so we are trying to find Nemo now, but not yet. But actually it's a signal that something is deeply wrong with the way that the system is being impacted by our activities. So we have this trend of, and more science is showing that climate change is moving species to the poles. And this causes, of course, two problems. One is that the tropics are becoming less and less habitable for many of these species, and the other one is the polar species don't have anywhere to go. So we can calculate the amount of movement that we have, and you can see that in 2050, it is estimated that on average, at the global scale, these centers of distribution will shift almost 300 kilometers to the poles. But in some cases, for instance, in open ocean, it could be 600 kilometers. So it's a big change on the distribution of animals. And of course, this is going to impact our fisheries, because the fishes that we have here today are not going to be the ones that we'll have in the future. And this will have a big disruption on the management of the ocean at the global scale. And we have also good predictions showing that if trends continue as they are, if we continue to warm the ocean as it is, we have here on this graph, we can show that in changes in between what the Paris Agreement calls for, which is 1.45 to 2 degrees warming, we will have decreases in biomass that can at the global level, amount to around 5%. But we need more food to feed the humans that will come, and not less. So we are having a direct impact on our food security by climate change, because we have these trends on biomass changes. And we can see that on the most extreme scenarios, this can go to almost 20% on average change in biomass. So it's a big threat that we are having because of this warming. Another effect that is less known, and actually it was something that came in the last UNFCCC meeting. IUCN released this report showing that the ocean is becoming less oxygenated. We have less oxygen in the ocean, with an amount of change of already 2% less oxygen. And 2% doesn't seem much, but what this means is that we'll have more stratification and we will have much less oxygen in the deep ocean mainly. And this is already affecting some species like, for instance, the billfish. That is a very fast-swimming species. It needs lots of oxygen to power its muscles, and is not already able to go as deep as they should to find their prey, because there's not enough oxygen there. So these are types of consequences that we are seeing from the scientific point of view. And we know that we have these on the table right now. We need that we are right here in terms of changes in CO2, the amount of greenhouse gases that we are putting out. We know that on the climate agreement, we are trying to go here, and we know that we have very little time to do this. If we overshoot this point, it will not be able to drive us to the 1.5 degrees that we are aiming at. If we overshoot this point, we'll be in a completely different reality. Even the 2 degrees, it's a very, very short time for us to reach that. And currently, this is where we are heading. Okay? Currently, we are heading to 4 to 5 degrees warming by the end of the century. And even with the most optimistic policies and the commitments that the countries have put on the table under the Paris Agreement, we are going to 2 to 3 degrees. So we have a big challenge in front of us, which is how are we going to solve this issue so quickly and so deeply? So we need to cut our emissions at a scale that was never seen before, and we need to do it now. And the science is clear on this, okay? So this is what we have done already. We have already warmed the planet 1 degree. This is where we are trying to stop the warming, 1.5, and this is where we are with the current policies, okay? So we have a big mismatch between what needs to be done, what science tells us that we need to do, and what the countries have agreed in doing. And the consequences for this are massive in terms of the ocean, okay? We are already on the route of losing the coral reefs. We know that 50% of those coral reefs are gone. And we also know that if we don't stop at 1.5, we will have all the reefs gone. With 2 degrees, there will be no coral reefs. Coral reefs represent 30% of the marine biodiversity. And this is the scale of the problem. But we will also impact a number of other ecosystems throughout the ocean, if we overshoot the 1.5 challenge. So this is a serious matter, and this is why we call it an emergency. We need to do these changes, and we need to do these changes now, and the science is clear. Now let me address the second topic. And the second topic for me is more like the dark side of the moon, okay? So it's there, but it's not visible. Climate is already on the agenda, although we are not able yet to come up with the necessary solutions. It's on the agenda, it's on the political agenda. The Green Deal of the European Union is here, so we are trying to solve the problem. On the species extinction crisis, well, maybe not so. So let me drive you to some of the science behind it. When we are talking about, something went wrong here on the slides, no matter, no problem. So when we're talking about the species extinction crisis, we are talking species that in the ocean, we don't know anything about them in most cases. So we have a few pictures from some expeditions, from some dives of submersibles, but we don't know how these species live, we don't know how they breed, we don't know how they find partners, we don't know how they use the ocean, and how they are going to be impacted by all these activities. So we have this, again, mismatch between the information we have and the changes that we need to do in policies in order to solve them. Some of these ecosystems are even key for us to understand the meaning of life, if you want, which is a topic that Zita is very closely attached to, because if we want to understand how life arises on the planet, or even how to look for life in other planets, systems in the oceans like hydrothermal vents that you see this picture here are key for us to understand extreme phenomenon. Extreme, how can life cope with non-average, let's say, situations, and those are found in these systems. And we are still finding new species here, like this Yeti crab that was recently described. Some of these species make the news because we find these names or these connections with humans. But the truth is that we don't know much about the biodiversity there, because of course we need very heavy investments on ocean technology and ocean capacity, such as these submersibles, in order for us to study these systems. And many times we are not willing to invest. But we don't need to go to the deep ocean to find new things. I photographed this nudibranch in one of the busiest diving places in the world, which is Bali in Indonesia, and this species is not described to science. So even in the shallow oceans, even in places where you have many people going, we don't have that information. And so every time we go out to sea, every time we go and meet our fellow creatures in the oceans, such as these mammals, we see new things, we find new species, and so we are still on the unknown side of these oceans. And of course, some of these encounters are completely magical, such as this one that we filmed, north of the Azores. And we have this animal, which is the largest predator that ever existed on the planet. It has the largest brain of any animal on the planet. And they make these gatherings. And we don't know anything about what they are doing. What are they talking about? How they think about us? We just know that they are there, they have a culture, they communicate with each other, but we don't know much more than that. But there are things that we do know every time we look at the statistics on how we are using the oceans. We see these trends. Decline, decline, decline. So we are overusing that ocean, we are overusing the resources, and we are having impacts on the ecosystem goods and services that the ocean provides to us. So we are hurting us. We are not just hurting the ocean. And again, we have very clear science supporting this. In some cases, such as the top predators, we already only have in the ocean 10% of what was there before the Industrial Revolution started. So we wiped out 90% of the big animals in the ocean, and these are the whales, the sharks, the tunas. So the big biomass of the ocean has been impacted by our activities. And a map like this is really overwhelming because you can see the reds over there, which are areas with high impact or very high impact. But the most shocking thing to see here is the amount of orange that you have. Okay? At the global scale, scientists calculate that only 30% of the ocean is wild, is intact, which means that everywhere else, humans already had a strong impact and a strong signature. So if you want to use a cartoon to typify what we have, in 100 years, we went from an ocean filled with fish with a few fishers to an ocean filled with fishers with few fish. And this is the problem. It's a very simple problem. We have wiped out, we have taken out too much fish from the ocean. So what are the solutions? What and how can we use these solutions too? This is a paper that just came out. That it's very clear from this paper what we need to do. And what you can extract here is a couple of messages, such as we know where we are heading. So we know where we are, where we came from. We have the historical data showing what we have degraded. And we also know where we are heading if we don't do nothing. But the most impressive things from here is that even if we increase conservation strategies, and if we start protecting all these places around the planet, we will not be able to solve the problem. Okay, so conservation efforts are not enough. We need to fundamentally change the human economy. We need to change the sustainable production. We need to change the way that we consume. And so we need to change our ways, because otherwise, only with conservation is not enough anymore. And this is a very clear message that I would like to put out. And this paper, I don't have time to go through it, but let me just show you, tell you what it is. So scientists have calculated the weight, the biomass of all living things on the planet. And I'm not going to discuss that. I'm just going to call your attention to this graph on the right. If we weight all the mammals that exist on the planet, humans are 36% of that weight. Okay? But human food, so the mammals that we eat, are 60%. If we put these two numbers together, what is left is 4%. All the wild animals, mammals on the planet represent 4% of the biomass. Everything else is humans or human-related food. Okay? So this is a clear evidence that our species became the dominant species on the planet, and our species have removed the other species in order to use that planet, or if you want, overuse that planet. So again, we know the message, a single message that I challenge you to take from this talk, okay? We cannot say anymore that we don't know, we know. So now the question is, what are we going to do about it? So if we have the knowledge, if we cannot say anymore as our parents and grandparents could because they didn't know what they were doing or they didn't have information for the consequences, if we know, what are we going to do? There are, I would like to leave it here to you, 2 key solutions. So the solutions are not 20 or 30, there are 2. One, we need to decarbonize our economy. We need to stop putting CO2 on the atmosphere, or otherwise the consequences are going to be dramatic for us. And we need to rebuild nature. And there are good news here on the second topic, at least, is that nature comes back if we allow it. We have tools to do this. But we also have tools to decarbonize the economy. Okay? So let me show you again what we need to do. This is the changes, the global greenhouse gas emissions, okay? And we have here where we need to go and where we are heading. So we have a gap. How can the ocean help to fill this gap? We have a number of solutions. I'm just going to throw them out, and then in the discussion we can detail them. But we can see, for instance, that there are a number of things that we can do in the ocean that will help try to fill this gap. Okay? The ocean itself is not enough, but it could help. Ocean-based renewable energy, green transports, rebuilding coastal ecosystems, which are carbon powerhouses. They absorb disproportionately much more carbon than forests. Fisheries and data aquaculture, carbon storage in the seabed. So these all together will give us around 20% of what we need in order to fill that gap. So it's already a big contribution, but we need to do all these things at the same time. Another solution that we have, and we have tested it already, is marine protected areas. And these marine protected areas are the key solution that we have to rebuild nature, to rebuild the biomass. So we know that they work, but we have only protected around 5% of the ocean, and for that, only around 2% are in fully protected areas. Okay? But you know that marine protection works. So when we close an area, we'll have bigger fish, more species. And of course, these species are not going to stay inside the marine protected area. They will travel along, and they will rebuild the stocks outside the protected areas. But we also know that not all conservation measures work. And some of our research has also been looking at this. We have a false sense of protection because countries talk about percentage of areas that they have protected, but then in the fact, we don't have more fish in the water. Meaning that these solutions only work if we do them properly. So we've built this classification system in trying to evaluate the effectiveness of these MPAs. And now we are using this, and we have also a clear guidance on what works. We know that larger areas are more effective, old areas, fully or highly protected, well enforced, well regulated, good governance models, on networks, etc. So we know how to do it. We just need to use these tools in order for the ocean to come back. And we are also, this is just coming back, what we call an MPA guide that we have collaborating. We're also making clear that an MPA is only established when it is implemented or actively managed, and they only work fully when they are fully or highly protected. So this is the corner where we want the MPAs to be. But if we put out the thousands of MPAs out there on this chart, we'll get lots of them on this corner over here. So we also know that these tools work. We know where we need to go. To finish, I would like to bring to you 3 solutions that the Oceano Azul Foundation is working, just as examples. One is this Blue Azores program. This Blue Azores is a partnership between the Oceano Azul, the Waite Institute and Foundation, which is an American foundation based in San Diego, and the government of the Azores. And these 3 partners agreed on this common vision to protect, promote, and value the blue natural capital of the Azores. And the main target of this program is to fully protect 15% of the EEZ of the Azores, but the EEZ of the Azores is quite big, it's 1 million square kilometers. So this 15%, to give an idea, it's almost around 4 to 5% of all European EEZ. So it's a big contribution to conservation if we are able to achieve this target. We have a 3-year plan to do this. And of course, we use partnerships. We use these partnerships at the international level to bring capacity to these programs. There are a lot of capacity already in the Azores, a lot of knowledge. And we use these scientific expeditions as tools to convince the government to change things and to bring these programs to be adopted. Oh, this slide went wrong. Anyway, these were just numbers from the expeditions, lots of effort, lots of dives, lots of people traveling and coming. And we have a suite of instruments that will go from the tagging at the shallow water of big animals to scuba diving, cameras, remote cameras, open water cameras, ROVs, also seabed mapping, and everything together puts out a wealth of information that will gather also the existing data from all the science that exists in these places. And of course, we also involve deeply the students on these expeditions, and every time we can, they will come on board. And in the end, we will have a number of recommendations on a scientific report for change. So this is where science can help change, and we can do this quickly. We can see exactly what the solutions will be and how to use them. The second example is on the economy. It's the Blue Bio Value Program. This is essentially an acceleration for startups. We also have an ideation part of this, which is working with universities right now, because we believe that the bioeconomy is going to be the economy of the future, and we are trying to help here, speeding up these solutions coming from the biotechnology to address the challenges that we are here talking about, such as climate change, food security, etc. So it's a partnership among a number of partners. It's in the third edition. It has been really, really successful in attracting startups from all over the world to such a program. The third and final example is this Rise Up Blue Call to Action. The video that I show in the beginning is our digital contribution to this campaign. And in this campaign, essentially, we come up with solutions for the ocean problems. So we gathered the most influential ocean foundations and ocean NGOs, fishers organizations, and indigenous peoples' rights organizations, and we come up with an agenda. And the letters of Rise Up are the topics of that agenda. So the R is to restore ocean life, the I to invest in a zero carbon economy, to the S to transition to a circular and sustainable economy, the E to empower coastal people, the U for governance, and then the P to protect 30% of the ocean by 2030. So concrete targets, concrete measures that are achievable, and this is all on this website, and any organization can come and sign on to this Rise Up, being it a scientific organization, civil society organization, and we're going to bring this voice to the UN Ocean Conference that we hope will come out next year. So just to finish, we know we have the solutions, so why aren't we being successful? And we aren't being successful because of us, okay? Because we don't like that message. We don't feel the need to change. We don't feel that we need to do something, although we know that we need to do something. So this is a challenge that I leave to all of us. What are you going to do about this now that you know? Thank you very much.
Emanuel, thank you so much for such an inspirational and important talk. Just have a few comments and then I'll go back to you so we have a discussion.
Thank you.
We do not have microphones here due to COVID. So I'll ask you all, the ones that are here, the attendees here, and also the people watching home online, please leave your questions on the YouTube streaming. And then our team will make sure that the questions reach me here on my mobile phone, and then I'll ask the questions to Emanuel. To kickstart our discussion and following on your challenge to all of us, we know that for Portugal, the oceans are our national treasure. We know that. Mm-hmm. Are we doing enough? And if not, what can we do now? What can we do to act now to improve all this climate emergency?
Zidas, thank you very much. Well, I would say that Portugal is not different for most other countries in terms of the incapacity yet to build on the solutions. But we have a big responsibility. Mm-hmm. Okay, we are the largest maritime country of Europe. If there was a G20, we'll be on the table, a G20 of the oceans. Yeah. We'll be there, okay? So we try to center ourselves and to see ourselves as a small country, but we are not. We are an ocean giant, okay? And what can an ocean giant do, and what should we do in order to contribute to the solutions and to also use the ocean properly? Mm-hmm. And I think there are at least 3 things that we need to do. We need to have the most informed citizens in terms of ocean science and information. So we need to educate this generation. That's one of the objectives of this foundation as well. We need to be the champions of ocean protection, because if we have more capacity, if we have more biomass, if we have more species, if we have those species protected, we are not only contributing to the solutions, but we can also do the third thing, which is we need an ocean economy, mm-hmm. which is sustainable and that can use these resources for our well-being. And so the thing that we have here is that Portugal is a rich country in terms of biomass, biomaterials, biodiversity. So we have the resources. We also have the brains, because there was lots of investments done in science in Portugal, as we all know, and we have very good centers on ocean sciences. So again, what is missing is using these for the solutions. So we need this to become the new economy. We need to transfer the knowledge that exists in the universities and in knowledge centers to the economic system and make sure that the activities will comply with the two solutions. They will decarbonize and they will help us save the species and
But
the planet.
don't you think we're acting a little bit like Dory on the movie? We're forgetting things very, very quickly. I mean, we've been in this situation of COVID where on March, I remember everybody saying we're going to act different. And 6 months, 7 months after that, we're not acting different. So what do we need to do? Urgency, some take-home message. I mean,
you know, we are very worried at the Oceano Azul Foundation, I must tell you. We are very worried because on one side there is hope because we see that when we want, we can act together. Okay, the response to COVID is unprecedented. The amount of investment that is being done in science, the speed with what things are coming up, the solutions that we are building is only because we have come together and we decided that we wanted to do. But people are not aware that we need to tackle these two topics. And we don't see the drive. On the contrary, we see the push to lay back, to relax environmental standards, to go back to normal. So go back to the old economy, go back to the economy that decarbonizes and the economy that destroys the planet. So we are very worried because of that. And this is why we think that this message is so urgent, because we really need to change things.
and last question, but definitely not the least. We know when we hear constantly that this will impact strongly our country, the rising of the levels of the sea, etc. Which other examples can you give us concerning our country? We know we're not isolated from the rest of Europe and the world, but just to give a perspective in terms of the impact in our country in, say, 10 years, 50 years, 100 years.
Yeah, so, you know, the impacts are multiple and they are overwhelming. Some of our coastal areas are going to disappear. You know, the airport of Faro, gone. It will be underwater.
Yeah.
The new airport that we are planning, gone.
Yeah.
It will be underwater.
Yeah.
Okay? So, but do we see yet this urgency of integrating these climate scenarios into policies? That's the question. So there is a gap here. And I believe that scientists have a big responsibility. They have a big responsibility because, again, we know. And since we know, we have to transmit this to society. We have to rally together and to convince politicians, convince decision makers, convince business leaders, convince us that we really need to focus on change and on solutions. So just losing territory is just one consequence. You know, our tourism depends on the beaches that we have. Gone. The sand will not be there anymore in 50 years' time. So if you look at the long term, and if you look at what country do you want to have, we are, and we should be, one of the leaders of pushing this agenda, because it's in our own interest. Food security is another topic that I could bring, okay? Our species are going to move a lot. Sardines are already showing up in Ireland, and it's a national symbol for us, you know? So these things are not minor, they are recent, and this is probably one of the consequences that this topic is not yet so much in the agenda. But again, the science is clear. We don't need more information to act. We do have that information, and actually we can use that for the benefit of our own economy and our own well-being if, for instance, we decide to be the champions on the biotechnology from the ocean. Because we know that many of solutions for ocean for the future will come from there. Not only on medicines, on pharmaceuticals, but also on biomaterials. There's a trove of solutions that will come from the ocean, and we could be on the front line if we decide to do so.
Okay. We have a question here from the audience that says, we know how important this topic is. How do we make the argument that we should focus our attention on it with the international pandemic occupying so much of our time and minds?
With international?
With international pandemic occupying so much of our time and minds.
Yeah, that's why we are so worried, you know, is that this shift of attention And almost this perception that nature is coming back. Nature is not coming back,
Yeah.
by the way. I hope it was clear from the message that I brought here. So there is this mismatch between things. But you know, my students many times ask me when I bring this somewhat, you know, depressing message of where we are, but then trying to focus a little bit on the solutions. And when they are energized and they ask, but what can we do? You know, we are too small to try to influence this big picture. And that's not true. That's what I show them. Every single behavior that we have, it's powerful and can make a change. And there are always three things that they can do, and we concentrate a lot the message here as well. They can vote, they can post, and they can buy. And these three things combined are a tool for change, okay? Because if we decide that we want these policies and they are important for us, we can vote in the ones that defend them. If we decide to buy correctly, we will do. And if we put the message out to others, we'll have an army into the right direction, so to say.
Thank you so much. We'll keep on discussing this on coffee break. We'll now have a coffee break. And for those at home and also here, we'll be back at 11 a.m. So thank you very much.